Hi all, this is the follow-up lecture 14. So we're following up from lecture 13 on multiplication and division of integers. And we want to do this because after you've modeled multiplication and division using your two color chips and your number lines, then you want to transition your students to more abstract set of rules. And so we want to do that in kind of the following way. So first we're going to look at some examples. So let's take a look at 2 times -3. And this says I'm going to add in or put in, I think I often use the word put in, 2 groups of 3 red chips. And if I do that, I'm going to put in 2 groups of 3 red chips. Then my answer is -6. If I switch that order, if I take out 3 groups of 2 red chips, I end up with the same exact thing. We've seen that a couple of times. And if you do negative times negative, like -4 times -2, this is take away 4 groups, because the -4, of 2 red chips. And that means that I've got to start with 4 sets of 2 0 pairs. Because then I'm still starting from 0. And then I'm going to go ahead and take away 4 groups of 2 red chips. So there's a 2, there's a 2, there's a 2, there's a 2. And I'm left with 8 positive chips. Right? Okay. And so you can see that when you take 2 negatives and multiply them together, you're always taking away red things, right? Because there's a negative for the first means take away, and a negative on the second means red. So you're taking away red. And when you take away red, you're always left with white, right? So anytime you've got 2 negatives, you're going to take away red, which leaves you with a positive. So 2 negatives make a positive when you're multiplying. However, when you're working with 1 positive and 1 negative, and we can also do the reverse here. So we can do -2 times +3, which is take away, and I'll zoom in here, 2 groups of 3 white chips. And that means I would have something that looks like this. So I need 2 groups of 3 0 pairs. And I'm going to take away 2 groups of 3 white chips. And when I take away white chips, then I'm left with red. So you notice that as long as I have 1 positive and 1 negative, I end up with red chips. So that tells me that when I'm multiplying 2 things with 1 negative, they're negative. But if I multiply 2 things with 2 negatives, it turns out positive. So that's our rule for the sign for multiplication. So we're always going to multiply the values in the same way that we did when they were whole numbers. And 1 negative implies that your answer is negative. And 2 negatives imply that your answer is positive. And then, of course, you can put this together to find out that as long as every 2 cancel out, right, essentially. And so for all odd number of negative signs, you get negative. And on even, you can kind of pair them up into 2s. And so you get any even number of negatives being multiplied gives you a positive answer. Okay, and that'll be our rule for multiplication. With division, it's exactly the same kind of thing. And the reason for that is that, notice that when we have these 3 statements, okay, so we had -2 times +3 equals -6. +2 times -3 is -6. And we had -4 times -2 is +8. Now remember that when we're thinking about division, right, what we do is we flip this This would be the same as negative 6 divided by negative 2 is positive 3, or negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2, right? You're taking away one of the factors and finding the opposite one. Okay, so, and then this one would be similar, right? We'd have negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2, and negative 6 divided by positive 2 is negative 3. And down here at the bottom, we would have 8 divided by negative 4 is negative 2, and 8 divided by negative 2 is negative 4, right? So I'm just reversing it so that the answer becomes the first part of your division divided by one of your factors, and the answer is the other factor, okay? So it's just kind of flipping the way that it's written. But notice what's happening. In any one of these, we get 2 negative signs and 1 positive. So that means if you're dividing a negative by a negative, the way you are here, and here, that means your answer is going to end up positive. So dividing 2 negatives becomes positive, kind of just like multiplication. But when you only have 1 negative, regardless of what position that it's in, your answer turns out to be negative. And that's what we want the students to take away. So our rules here for division as we transfer is that we divide the values just like we normally would. And then 2 negatives that we're dividing, the answer is positive. And 1 negative, the answer is negative. Okay, and we can kind of extrapolate that right from what we were doing with multiplication.